There are stories of garage bands bringing in generators and practicing in self-storage facilities.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 45 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
Hello and welcome to episode 21. Today, I'm excited to be talking with Mike Laragy about a topic that I've always found very interesting, but have never actually done myself, and that is invest in self-storage. And Mike is actually doing it. So we're going to talk about that, and we're also going to be talking about Mike's original portfolio of rental properties that he began building in the 80s, some of which he purchased with no money down techniques. Mike, thanks so much for being here today.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's great to be invited.
You were telling me off mic about how you started getting into investing. And in fact, real estate is sort of in your blood. So why don't you talk about the beginning?
Yeah, I mentioned to Brian earlier that when I was a kid, my mom was a real estate agent. And this was back quite a few years ago when you had to actually tear out index cards for all your listings and put them in a little file box. And that was our job as kids to maintain that for my mom. So we did everything from organizing her files to pounding the signs in the front yard for open houses and all that kind of stuff. So I was real comfortable with the real estate buying and selling process because every night my mom would come home and kind of give us the details over the dinner table about what happened or didn't happen in the real estate market as she knew it. So when I went out in the real world myself after graduated from college and all that kind of stuff, I was ready to buy real estate, and I was a single guy, a couple dollars in my pocket, had a pretty good job. And so I started buying not only my first own house, but started buying rental properties.
Very cool. And go back to your mom for a moment. Now, was she an investor as well, or was she just a realtor who bought and sold real estate for other people? She
was kind of an investor by default, is that in order to put deals together, sometimes agents would take their commission in terms of a note or something on the property in order to make the deal come together. So she might take a little $2,500 or $5,000 note in lieu of her commission. And that was primarily with real estate investors buying multiple properties. So they were trying to conserve their cash, and so they would work deals with the agents, and the agents would get this small stream of income. I don't know how prevalent that is today, but it was a kind of a fairly routine thing when my mom was doing it.
So she worked with investors, and it seems like in a way she was sort of a hard money lender because she was taking her commission and turning it into a hard money loan with her investors.
Right, and actually, she would come to me later on when I had a job and was making a few bucks, and said, "I got a guy who wants to buy a property. He needs a few $1,000s to make the deal come together. Do you want to lend him the money?" And of course, interest rates were quite a bit different back then, maybe 10 or 12%.
So if you loaned the money, what were you getting for that?
I was getting something around there, 10% interest on the note. And they were small amounts of money. They weren't big, huge amounts. But again, the price of houses were a lot less than they are today, too. So,
and that's an interesting, way to start and kind of be introduced to real estate investing. You sort of by default, because of your mom's occupation, became a hard money lender.
Yeah,
and saw her doing it. I mean, what do you remember consciously thinking? Well, let me analyze the numbers on this deal that these investors are getting into, or were you just handing over a couple thousand and collecting your 10% interest?
Yeah, there was no analysis on my part. My mom would say the house is on the corner of X, walk and don't walk street, and he owns 27 other properties, and it's going to be a 3-year deal, and you're going to make this much money on it. I never checked. I didn't know if I was first, second, third, fourth, fifth position on the note.
Your mom said, "Hey, it's good. The investor is good. The house is good."
And they all worked out. The guy would turn the houses over, and we get paid off at the closing. So it was all on the up and up, and it worked out. Plus, she knew these guys, the investors, pretty well, and they were long-term type customers of ours.
What a great way to kind of get introduced to real estate investing. Fill in the blanks here, but it seems like you went out into the work world, got a job, but at some point also started investing yourself.
Yeah, you watch too much TV or you pick up the wrong newspaper and there's some ad in there telling you to go to this seminar on the weekend. My guy that I hooked up with was a guy named Robert Allen.
Oh, right. Yeah, I've had conversations about Robert Allen. In fact, I actually did some Robert Allen seminars as well.
Yeah, Nothing Down is a book. In fact, he's had many iterations of his book, but the one I was dealing with was Nothing Down for the 80s. So that tells you how far back I go. And so I did. I was living in Pittsburgh at the time. I was working in the oil business and spent a weekend in a hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. And within a month, I had bought 4 properties. So
For Nothing Down?
Pretty much. I mean,
Really?
some nominal, less than $2,000 or $3,000 down.
So let's talk about Robert Allen for a second. And you could have done a commercial for him if you went to a seminar and then within a month you own 4 properties, Nothing Down.
Yeah.
Talk about that, because Steve Whittaberry, one of my guests from a couple of weeks ago, he and I were talking about Robert Allen and the concept of Nothing Down. And nowadays, I think people think Nothing Down, and they feel that what that really means is they don't bring any money. They use other people's money. Which Robert Allen, that was the concept, but there was a way of going about it back then that I'm not sure is possible anymore. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I think, the book that he has would be just a listing of 50 different Nothing Down methods or something. And they all involved, like you said, using OPM, other people's money, maybe borrowing $1,000 on a credit card, which you got to pay it back, obviously. But so really, instead of going to your checking account or your savings account and coming up with cash out of your pocket, you're somehow financing the deal or making the deal come together without actually putting any hard currency into it. And my deal was not strictly Nothing Down because I did write some small checks to make the deals happen. I kind of stumbled into it. I was looking at buying a condo in an apartment conversion property. And the guy that was doing the conversion was quite an astute investor. And I scribbled all my Robert Allen legalese down on a yellow notepad, submitted it with my purchase offer to the guy. He had 50 of these things to sell, and I think he was down to his last maybe half a dozen or 10 units. And he came back to me and said that, okay, I'll work with you on this deal. And instead of having a down payment from me, he lent me the down payment. And he also guaranteed tenants for the first year. So we worked out a deal to not only buy one property, but to buy 4 of his properties. I bought his 4 worst condos in the building because those are the hardest ones to get rid of. And they were, in the $50,000 to $60,000 range back then. And put the whole deal together, financed it down the street. He already had a lender lined up. The lender knew it was all above board. He knew what was going on. We weren't playing any games. Put the whole deal together. And I did have to write some small checks for appraisals and that kind of stuff, but probably less than $2,000 total out of my pocket to put the 4 properties together. So,
wow, what a great deal! What a great no money down type deal. I mean, no money down. You're always going to have some money in the game,
right,
whether it be paying for third party reports or whatever. So let me just recap what you just said. This was in Pittsburgh, is that
Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania?
Pittsburgh,
right.
Pennsylvania. You were working there at the time. You found a condo developer who had 4 units he was trying to get rid of and having difficulty. You were able to get financing, and the down payment, the condo developer put that up for you.
Right. Instead of having the terms are pretty easy. I think they only needed 10% down on these deals because they had a local savings and loan just a few blocks away from the building that was financing all the properties in the building. If you wanted to, you didn't have to go through them, but they were doing it with good terms. And I met with that guy, and the 10% down, in my case, roughly $5,000 per unit, would have been $20,000, And so what we did with the seller is that he put he waived his down payment, and we had a note that I owed him. So I paid him separately on a note along with my regular mortgage payment. So we did that outside the closing, and it was all above board. Everybody knew what was going on. And I had a pretty good job, and I had, I was able to qualify for all the loans and everything. And then the properties were rented from day one, and they cash flowed a little bit, not a huge amount, but they cash flowed after all the expenses and everything. So I was a 4-unit, real estate investor inside of, 60 days. By the time we got everything closed up and everything, it was a relatively short time from my Robert Allen seminar.
And that was the beginning of your portfolio.
Yes, yeah.
So you went to a Robert Allen seminar, learned these techniques, and within 60 days you had closed on 4 condos.
Yeah, it probably took a little longer than that to close them all, but and then I get a call from the seller say, hey, I got somebody here that wants to buy one of your units, and that was about 3 months later. So I sold one almost within 90 days or maybe 4 months, I guess, and got all my money back. I sold it for a little bit more than I paid for it, maybe another $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. Got all my money back that I put into the deal, plus a little extra. So it worked out good,
So then you still had three units. How did those end up turning out? Did you sell those eventually?
Well, I promptly got transferred out of there. I was only there for a couple of years, and I got transferred up to Traverse City, Michigan.
Okay.
And so I lived up there for another 6 or 7 years. I was buying properties up there.
So sticking with the Pittsburgh units for a moment, were you still managing those from Traverse City, or did you sell those before you left?
No, I kept them. The seller of the developer of the property, we had a management agreement for a couple of years for him to manage the properties for me. So he was finding my tenants and leasing them for me as part of our initial purchase agreement. We had a guaranteed rent income, whether we're full or and this is kind of unusual stuff. You might not be able to do this today, but he wanted to move these properties. So he guaranteed me rent on the 3 units going forward. Even if they were empty, he would pay me. So
in perpetuity or just for the first
for a couple of years.
For a couple of years.
I forget the exact terms of the deal, but 2 or 3 year agreement.
Okay.
And it was no big deal. He kept them full pretty easily. It was a desirable place to live, and they were nice properties, and I never had a couple of them. I never even went in between the time I bought them and sold them. Never went inside them.
So when did you end up selling them?
The last one I sold probably 5 or 6 years ago.
Okay, so
kept
you
them quite
hung
a
on.
while, yeah.
And so cash flow during that time. I mean, this is very interesting because you got 4 condos with no money down.
Yeah.
100% of it financed by a bank, and then the person who built the development. What was the cash flow like during that period?
Well, initially it was relatively small because interest rates were high at the time, and so it was maybe just out of the 3 units, they rented roughly $600 a month, so say $1,800 a month income. And my notes on the mortgages, I think, as I recall, were $400 or so per unit. So that's $1,200. I only got $400 left to work, and I paid taxes, condo
insurance,
fees, and all that kind of stuff.
So you were break even for a while.
It was just kind of break even for the first few years. But then I refinanced them.
Okay.
Interest rates came down significantly, and I think my total payments on all 3 properties was less than $1,000. And then they started to and the rent started going up. Okay. So I cash flowed a little bit, maybe $300-$400 a month for several years, and and then I also got, because I was single, I got some nice tax write-offs because this is back in the day when you could accelerate the depreciation on the properties. So instead of 27 and a half years, it was 15 years.
Okay.
So you got some pretty heavy-duty depreciation. So
yeah, when you have a job and it pays well, having some real estate and the tax write-offs that come with that can be very helpful.
Yeah, it was great. So so I kept going. I bought one here and there. I was still working for the same company up in Traverse City, and I was looking at bargains. I was trying to find HUD properties or Mishta properties or foreclosures or whatever that I could find around the Traverse City area, which everyone knows is a really hot market now.
Right. And when you say Traverse City, for our listeners, you're talking about Traverse City, Michigan,
right,
which is in the northern part of the lower peninsula of Michigan.
A very desirable place to live now for anyone in the Michigan area. Beautiful waterfront, all that kind of stuff. So I loved it up there. And but my wife is from Grand Rapids, so that's why I'm here.
Okay. Yeah, Traverse City is fantastic. So you were investing up there. What was your portfolio like in Traverse City?
Well, I was still buying single-family homes primarily. I was doing a lot of buying properties on land contracts. Land contracts are pretty popular in Michigan, especially back then.
And then time-wise, was this during the 80s, 90s?
This was
when were you up there?
Mid-80s to early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, I got transferred up there in 84, and I think I left in 97.
So land contracts, were you still doing no money down type deals, or were you now putting a little bit of your own money into it?
Small amounts of money to make the deal come together. The no money down deals were, maybe you could pull one off here and there, but that wasn't my primary focus. It was more finding a good deal that made sense. They always say you make your money when you go into the deal. And so that's kind of what I was concentrating on. Mm-hmm. And I would buy properties on a contract, fix them up a little bit, and then wrap it with a new contract, a little higher interest rate, maybe a little higher mortgage amount, and then I would just keep the difference.
So talk about wrapping for those who don't understand what you're talking about. What does that mean, you would wrap it?
So years ago, loans used to be assumable. If you had a VA or a government a backed loan, most of them were assumable. So if you wanted to sell your house and say you had a $100,000 house with an $80,000 VA loan on it, the buyer could take over that loan and not go to a bank and get a new loan. You'd get your down payment, and then you go away, and the new guy would be responsible for the loan. So that was quite common back then. And then another type of financing was land contract. So people would say they had an underlying VA loan on their property, and they wanted to sell it, but they wanted to get more cash out of it than was available, or at a much higher price. And so there was a big gap between the selling price and what their loan value was. So they could technically put a new loan on the property and sell it on a land contract and then keep the underlying VA loan. So that was a wrap. So say the VA loan is at 80, you turn around and sell a house for 150 with a $130,000 land contract, you got a $50,000 difference in there in your loan value at a different interest rate, and you could make the spread on that. So I don't know if that makes sense.
Well, who would make the spread? You as the investor, or the seller, the homeowner? The seller would make that spread.
The seller would.
The seller would procure the loan. They would get the loan.
Right.
Sell the property to you on a land contract. You would assume the loan, and they would get the difference between the loan and the sale price.
Right. And then I would do that also. So you might have a property with 3 or 4 underlying wraps or loans on it. Probably originally there'd be some type of government-based loan at the bottom in first position, and then there might be a land contract or 2 wrapped around that, typically at different interest rates, higher interest rates. So even though you might sell the property for roughly the same that you bought it for, if you did the financing right, you could still make a little bit on the spread. Mm-hmm. And you're out of the deal and just get a cash or a check coming in every month.
Yeah, and that's I think that's one of those no money down type techniques that I remember Robert Allen talking about, is the wraps. And
yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but and that I don't think you can do anymore. I think banks have gotten wise and made it a lot more difficult.
Yeah, they don't. There's
for that to happen.
Very few assumable loans out there, conventional loans that are assumable anymore. Mm-hmm. So, and I think, in fact, in most they have a due on sale clause that if you do sell the property or change title of the property, they can demand that the loan be paid in full. So most new loans are written that way.
So let's get back to Traverse City. So you were buying some single families up in Traverse City.
Yep.
And you built a portfolio up there. What happened next? You moved to Grand Rapids?
Yeah, I moved down to Grand Rapids primarily because the real estate market was a little better down here.
Once you got to Grand Rapids, then what were you doing as far as
I bought
investing?
my first rental property on an assumable loan, not too far away from here. I still live there, actually.
Okay, so
yeah.
you live in the first rental property you bought here in Grand Rapids.
Because I got married in that time period, and so it became primary residence versus rental. I would buy properties and fix them up and then sell them.
Okay.
Or hold them for rent or for long term. And so.
So you were doing some fix and flips then.
Yep. And this was a perfect candidate. It was a nice home in a nice little neighborhood, but it was pretty run down and beat up. And so my plan was just to fix it up and move on, because it had, an assumable loan, a VA loan in place that I could assume and take over. So that made it easy to get into. But then I got involved with a gal here in town and got married, and we needed a place to live. So we had to accelerate the improvement program to get it ready to move into. So we still live there today. We've done a tremendous amount of work to the house, put an addition on and all kinds of crazy stuff. But yeah.
Okay. And were you buying other properties in the area?
Yep. I was buying properties here and there, mostly, in Kent County, not too far afield. I'd had enough of that long distance landlording stuff because I was still doing it in Traverse City and I still had properties in Pennsylvania. So it's kind of a tough thing to do. I had a management company in Pennsylvania watching those properties, but the ones in Traverse City I was still taking care of, so I was still running back and forth.
Oh, so you would go up to Traverse City. That's at least a 2-hour drive back each way. All right, so you had properties in 3 different locations. The one in Pittsburgh. When did you sold the last one 5 years ago? Did you make a good profit off of those?
We did. It's it's relative because the Pittsburgh real estate market is a little bit like Grand Rapids. It's a kind of a slow grind. It's not a San Francisco or an East Coast property where they zoom up 10-20% every 2-3 years. In Pittsburgh, when I moved there, the steel industry was going down the tubes. Detroit and the auto industry was in poor shape, so they weren't buying steel, and so Pittsburgh was suffering, and so they're going through a real transition when I got there. So property prices were pretty depressed, and right now Pittsburgh is a pretty thriving little community now. I've just spent some time there recently with some friends, and it's a nice area.
Yeah, they've managed to reinvent themselves.
Yeah, changed it dramatically. So all those smelly old steel plants up and down the river are now being replaced with, retail projects and hotels, and people want to be by the water and take advantage of the vistas. Pittsburgh is a really cool place to see at night when you come through the tunnels and see the buildings, the downtown area. It's pretty impressive.
Well, I want to get into the self-storage because at some point you decided, I'm not so crazy anymore about the rental properties. Self-storage is the way to go. Can you kind of talk about that change in your philosophy?
It was an RPOA, the winter meeting where we have all the speakers and stuff come into
the annual conference.
The conference in February, I think it typically is. And so this would be 2013. I went to it, and I happened to sit in on a talk by a guy named Scott Myers out of Indianapolis. And he is a self-storage, I wouldn't say guru. I don't like that term guru too much anymore, but he runs a training and investment entity that helps people get involved in self-storage. So he gave a little talk for an hour, and I signed up to go down to Indianapolis for a 2-day seminar with him for a few $100 just within a month or two. It was shortly after the February meeting, and got involved with his group in terms of some training and so on, and started looking seriously for a self-storage property. So that was early 2013, say spring of 2013. It took about a year, 15 months, 16 months before we finally found a property that we signed a deal on.
So, and you were actively looking during that,
Yep.
that period?
Yeah.
So you're obviously a man of action, because you go to a Robert Allen seminar and no money down, and within 60 days you've closed on 4 condos. You go to a self-storage seminar, and within a year and a half or so, you're closing on a self-storage facility. I mean, before we get into the nuts and bolts of self-storage and what you were looking for, just talk about that, taking action. Because a lot of people go to these seminars, they dream the dream, they want to do it, but for some reason they don't. What is it that makes you follow through?
Well, I don't know if you can point to one thing, but I think if you had a little bit of history of success doing something, that a little confidence, then you're not afraid to step out there and try something a little bit different. Now, self-storage is not that much different than investing in a little single-family home. It's on a much bigger scale, generally, but the idea is the same. Instead of renting a house, now you're renting a box, an empty box. And to me, it was a compelling argument. Just looking at the financial side of it, the ROI on a self-storage facility versus my little portfolio of single-family homes, it was a dramatic difference. For the money I had tied up in single-family homes, if I could, reallocate that to self-storage, financially, it made much more sense to me.
Well, talk about that argument. I mean, what for those who aren't familiar with self-storage, which is probably quite a few people, what is the argument for doing self-storage? First of all, talk about self-storage. What exactly is self-storage, and why does it make a good investment? Well,
I think the biggest thing that tripped my trigger was that when you're looking at a property like a home, a real estate investment, and I was primarily a single-family home guy. I didn't do a lot of multifamily stuff. I stubbed my toe on that a few times, and I kind of backed away from it. And I stuck with single-family homes because, and in fact, we mentioned Robert Allen. Remember that he had this little, real estate is an ideal investment because it produces income, depreciation, equity, build up, appreciation,
leverage,
and leverage. So there's something, I learned that 30 years ago. And so it did do all those things. But the problem with single family homes is you can't control appreciation other than what you can do by building in some improvements and so on. And the leverage side of it was great. That's when everyone gets into, you can control quite a bit of real estate with a small amount of money. And then you get that bang return on investment. So the thing that attracted me to self-storage is in contrast to rental single-family home real estate was that you can really work on the numbers and you can improve the rental income and you can change the value of the property by increasing your rents and increasing your occupancy and improving the property. So the value of the property is depending on what you put into it. You're not subject to the whims of the neighborhood so much. So that was what tripped my trigger.
And that's an important point because I teach a class on advanced financial analysis, and I make that distinction all the time between the residential property, which is 1 to 4 units, and the value of residential property is based on comparables. What do similar properties sell for within a half mile to a mile radius? Whereas with commercial property, which could be multifamily, 5 units and above, or self-storage, the value is based on the net operating income. And you can raise that net operating income by increasing your income and decreasing your expenses. And then it's a mathematical equation that basically tells you what that property is worth. Yep. And in multifamily, there's a rule of thumb that for every dollar that you increase the income or decrease the expenses, you're adding $10 in value to the property.
So you're looking at like a 10% cap rate is what?
Yeah, based on a 10% cap rate. So it's just a rule of thumb. We know cap rates are compressed, which increases the value even more than a value of 10. But it's the same for self-storage. And you realize that because it's a commercial type investment. You can control the value. You can force the appreciation on it. Compare it to rental property ownership. I mean, what are some of the expenses you don't have compared to rental property and some of the expenses you do have?
Well, you have all the same costs of owning. That you have real estate taxes, you have utilities, you have all that type of stuff. You have maintenance and those types of things. As you would with any type of property, you have to keep it up. And you have costs related to managing the property. In my case, my little single-family home stuff, I handled most of the management for most of my properties, or I would hire someone to do it. And then same in self-storage.
To me, it seems like one of the nice things about self-storage is you don't have a toilet for every unit. You don't have a kitchen for every unit. You basically have a space. And once you've built that space, you don't have all the costs that are associated with owning multifamily like I do, where every unit has a certain amount of expenses. Now, I know you own a building, you've got the taxes and insurance, and maybe there's a bathroom, so you do have some plumbing and that, but it's just one location as opposed to multiple locations. What are some other things that you like about self-storage and your ability to force appreciation?
Well, like you discussed, you don't have the toilets, trash, tenants issues. You do have customers, and we call them tenants, but one of the nice things about it is if you have a problem tenant in an apartment or in a home, it's a difficult process to get them to leave. You can't get them to pay the rent, then you have to try and get them to leave. That's a whole legal process you have to follow. With self-storage, you actually have a lien on the goods that are stored in your facility. And so you can, and everyone's seen the TV shows, Storage Wars and all that, where they're auctioning off the contents of the units. That's the culmination of the process that you have to go through to have your tenant leave. Basically, if they're not paying your rent, you can force a lien sale of their goods. And that process in Michigan can be as short as 45 days with advertising and all the legal things you have to do. Now, saying that's the last thing we want to do. We prefer to have customers come in, get to pay their stuff, and take it away and not go through that whole Storage Wars process. But that's a significant advantage as an operational viewpoint over having to deal with courts and suing and attorney fees and all that kind of stuff. It's a civil judicial process that doesn't involve any courts or anything like that to have this happen. And nowadays in Michigan, you can do it all via email. You can do electronic communications. You can advertise the contents for sale on a website. You can have a virtual sale at the website, and then the buyer shows up. It's kind of like an eBay of self-storage now.
Huh. So are there plenty of buyers out there who are interested in that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's guys that actually make a living buying stuff, and they run little, secondhand stores, or they're collectors. They're looking for, pretty unique things. Depending on how you list the contents of the unit, they'll look for trigger words like, like card collections or baseball cards or sports memorabilia, something like that, that will trigger them. And they can now search for that stuff across the country at these websites.
Wow. So that's interesting because, if you're evicting someone from a house or a multi-unit property, you're basically, the worst case scenario, which sometimes happens, is you're just putting all their stuff to the curb.
Yeah.
But in self-storage, you can actually sell that stuff. You don't even have to take it to the curb. You can just have an investor come along, pay for the opportunity to take whatever is in that space.
And actually, we charge them a $100 security deposit to make sure they take it all and they don't leave any of it behind.
Wow.
So you want the unit empty when they get done. So
wow. So that's a big cost savings right there. and potentially a moneymaker as well.
Yeah, I don't know about making money on it. Typically, by the time you get through to the lien sale end game, you're a little behind, and it'll be a rare, in my experience, it's a rare circumstance where you actually get made whole. And if you do get all the back rent that's owed you, then you have to forward the balance, anything over that, back to the tenant.
Okay. So you're not allowed to make money off
There's
of
no
it,
opportunity for making money.
Yeah, but at least you can be made whole, and it sounds like a much easier process from your
Real
standpoint.
simple. And then the state associations are pretty good about trying to keep pace with current technology and allowing different types of communication with the clients, emails and texting and that type of stuff to notify them, because sometimes it's difficult to track folks down, especially in the storage business. People are typically moving or storing stuff because of some underlying reason. They call it the 3 Ds of self-storage. There's divorce, death, or disaster that drives the business. So, or it could be dislocation. They're moving from one property to another. So sometimes there's a little problem tracking them down by mail, and they don't keep their addresses current. So being able to contact them using alternative means that are legal within the state mandates is good.
Right, an email would be the most efficient way to do that.
Yeah.
So let's back up a little bit, because you had a rental property portfolio in Pittsburgh, Traverse City, and Grand Rapids, but then you got introduced to self-storage, and you said, okay, I'm going to get rid of my rental property portfolio and start looking for self-storage. Talk about that a little bit. I mean, how did you come to that decision, and then how did you take action on that decision?
Well, I think when I decided to start looking for a facility, they start thinking about all the things you're going to need to do that. And obviously, you're going to need some money. The chances of getting a storage facility for nothing down are probably pretty rare. They do happen. I've heard about a few deals that people have done that are nothing down in the old real estate investing tradition. But typically you go out and you have to get financing, and it's a 20% down type scenario. So I needed to raise some capital to be able to do that. So that was the impetus for starting to liquidate some of the properties I had. And the markets were doing, better. And I had, some equity sitting there not being used. So
this was around 2013, 2014? Yeah. Okay, yeah, markets were definitely improving.
And I had a lot of my properties I had held for long term, so I had quite a bit of equity stuck in these properties that I hadn't tapped through refinancing or any other method. So I was just comfortable with the low loan balance and positive cash flow for a change, versus the other equation where it's going the other way. So,
well, wasn't that a little scary though? If you were comfortable with the cash flow you were making and the loan balance and everything, and then to think, well, I'm going to sell all of this, which around that time, is that when you left your job as well?
No, I had been out of the workforce, a JOB type job since early 2000, 2004, 2005, something like that.
Okay. So you were basically, your income was coming from rental property.
Right.
So that was a big leap of faith to say, all right, well, now I'm just going to sell it all and move my money into something else. I mean, how did you, get over that?
It in my mind, it wasn't that big a jump, because I could see the numbers. Even if I bought a relatively small facility, I could see the numbers were comparable in terms of cash flow in my personal situation. And I was confident we could make the jump, but it wasn't like I was going to be out on the street if things didn't work out. I mean, we had other resources, and so I don't want people to think that I was like jumping off a cliff, because it was not. I didn't keep me up at night worrying about this.
So you were very comfortable making this decision.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then there was this process of selling off your properties, taking the cash, and getting ready to deploy it into a self-storage facility. But you had a year and what would you say, about a year and 3 months?
We put offers out on properties for about 12 or 14 months before we finally got a deal accepted. And my original intention was to buy something close to Grand Rapids on the west side of the state. And I had a little circle of area that I was looking at, Kent County, Ottawa County. And then, and we looked at quite a few properties in that area. There's over 1,000 self-storage facilities in Michigan. And you don't notice them until you start looking for them, and then they're everywhere. So, and I had certain size requirements, and it couldn't be smaller than X, and it couldn't be bigger than Y. And so that kind of narrowed the focus down. And then it had to be a property that had some upside potential. Either it was being poorly managed, or it had some deferred maintenance items, or some way we can improve the value of it, getting back to our trying to raise the ROI or NOI on the property.
So does that mean you were looking for kind of independent owner operators?
Yeah.
Mom and pop type operators?
Mom and pop still control, independent owners still control about 80% of the storage facilities in the U.S. And I think the most recent thing I read, there's over 50,000 facilities in the U.S. And a lot of talk about public storage and the big REITs that dominate the news, but they only control about 20% of the market. The rest is smaller independent owners.
Okay. Wow. What were some of the criteria you were looking for, other than the upside potential, like in analyzing the numbers and just qualifying these properties as you were making offers?
Well, you want a property that you can predict or determine that there's a need for what you're selling, which is storage space. And so there's a metric that you can use, you can apply to a geographic area to determine if the area is over or underbuilt in terms of self-storage space. And that number happens to be about 7 square feet per person right now in the U.S. So if you're under 7 square feet per person, you're underbuilt. And if you're over 7 square feet per person, you're overbuilt.
Wait. Let me make sure I understand that. You mean 7 square feet of available storage space?
Of storage.
Per person within
some geographic
geographic boundary. So if you're over 7 square foot per person of available storage space, then it's overbuilt.
That's kind of and it all depends on the type of area you're looking into. Because big MSAs, big metro markets are much different. The numbers can be very different than more suburban type areas, and then rural areas are different also. But most of your customers come within a 3 to 5 mile radius.
Really?
So people don't go too far for their self-storage. They want it to be convenient and local.
They want it to be right down the street.
Even though they don't go there to visit it, they want it to be right there.
That way it feels like an annex of their home. Yeah. Wherever they live, it's sort of like an annex, and they can just pop over there. Okay. Well, what about number-wise, like financially, the financials? What were you using to qualify these properties?
Well, obviously as a small investor, what I was looking for was cash-on-cash return. So I wasn't so much concerned with the ROI that the big boys would be looking at, like the public storage folks. When they mass up a bunch of money from private investors and go out and buy a property, they're willing to pay quite a bit more because the yield that they're looking for is 5, 6, 7% on their money. So if they buy $1 million property, if they earn $50 or $60 or $70,000 a year on that property, they're good. Whereas a small investor, most of us would not be happy with that type of return. And you're going to plunk $1 million down, you'd want a little more than $50,000 or $60,000. Now, the way they operate is that they're going to improve the operations of the property, and over time, they're going to improve that $50,000, $60,000 on their $1 million to who knows what, 12, 14%. So they'll be doing much better. And then, of course, the value of the property will go up also. So as a small guy, what I was looking for is if I put 20% down on $1 million property, it's a couple $100,000. What type of cash flow am I going to get on my couple $100,000? And so I was looking for something in the 15% range.
So cash on cash return being the money, the return you get on the actual money that you put down out of pocket. And if you put down $200,000 out of pocket, you would want at least a 15% cash on cash return.
Right.
Right. Okay, so that's pretty good. And obviously that, you found some properties that sort of met that criteria and made offers. Now, what was that experience like with the offers you were making?
Well, it's a hot market right now for self-storage, and it's just like selling houses right now is a seller's market, and it was difficult to get too much negotiation on price, too many price concessions. So we ended up looking at properties that needed more work, that were either run down or managed poorly, or the seller was a little bit of a don't want, or they had other issues going on. And those are the ones where we get the furthest down the road in terms of negotiations. But unfortunately, I didn't find any of those very close to where we live, and I had to go further afield. So the facility we found was over in Burton, Michigan, which is a suburb of Flint, like southeast of Flint, between Flint and Grand Blanc. And that property over there was kind of a smaller property, 33,000 square feet, 230 some units. And it had been kind of neglected. The folks that owned it owned another property, and this was kind of a secondary investment that they were just tired of, dealing with. So we were able to get a little bit of a negotiation going with those folks and close the deal.
So that deal met your 15% cash on cash return requirement.
As it stood the day we bought it, it was real close to that. Mm-hmm. And then looking down the road a year or two, we could see that it would be much better than that long term.
Okay, so you've owned this for at least a year now, right?
Just April 15th, we closed on it last year. So just,
Okay, so you're
months.
bringing efficiencies to it, trying to raise the income, lower the expenses. Talk about that. How are you going about that?
Well, the previous owners had not raised rents in 6 years, and their method of operation was a little different. I had been kind of schooled in more modern methods of monitoring the facility and tracking the income and expenses and so on. And our system now is completely web-based platform where we track all of our tenants. We do all of our work online. I can move someone in or do anything basically from wherever I'm at with my phone and with a little cheap
So you can
laptop.
be in Grand Rapids managing your facility
Yep.
just south of Flint.
So I manage it remotely right now, yes.
Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about, so you must have had to then invest in the software and the systems to integrate this into the facility, or were those systems already there?
They weren't. They had an older system that was a desktop-based system that a lot of self-storage owners use. It's a very good system. It was just outdated, and they had not kept up with the times and gone to a web-based system. So that's the first thing we did. Within 30 days, we had switched over to the new system, instituted some different operational procedures, and raised prices across the board on all of our units. What the storage industry does now is similar to airlines. They have dynamic pricing based on demand. So if you're waiting in line to rent a 10 by 10 storage unit for $100 and there's 5 people in front of you and you're all waiting for the same unit, and there's 6 left and you're at the end of the line, and by the time they get to you, the price might be $120 for that same unit, just like the price of airline tickets go up. We're not that dynamic. We track our prices But some of the big boys, some of the big public storage people will raise and lower their prices daily.
So are they just using an algorithm, or is there a human making that decision?
It's an algorithm that's built into the software, and it can be pretty sophisticated. It can be based on occupancy, and then the number of units you have, and you can also skew it. If you have one size that's not selling very well, you can lower the price on that. Just like airlines do, they got a bunch of empty seats, and they fly into Orlando, and they're trying to fill the plane. They'll drop the prices to fill it up. So we're not to that point yet. Our prices are pretty steady on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, but we do have the capability.
And talk about managing remotely. I mean, what is the hard? Is there a person managing there on site when you're not there? Or do you just have like a vending machine? Because I've heard of self-storage facilities where you just have a vending machine, and if someone wants to rent a locker, they put their credit card in the machine, a lock drops down and says, go to this unit number.
Yeah, there's a company, and they picked a great name for their product. It's a ATM kiosk type product, like a vending machine, like you said, and they call it the Insomniac 2000 or whatever. And it's there. It's on all night and day, and that's it. Basically, you walk up to it. It's got a map of the facility. You point at what you want. It's got a little screen. Someone will talk back to you. Pick up the phone if you're confused. There's multiple languages. It's a pretty sophisticated operation. We do not have one of those yet, but we're looking at it real strongly because it also accepts payments. So a lot of folks come in, they want to make a payment in person. They want a receipt. Most of our customers pay with a credit card or debit card online, either through our website or an auto pay type system. But a lot of folks still bring checks in, and some folks even bring cash in. So
does that mean you have to have an employee on site during that business hours?
Well, around the first of the month, all of our bills are due on the first of the month. We do maintain some staffing, across that time period in order to deal with all the customers. Because we got a couple hundred customers, coming and going.
Sure. And do you have established hours at which they can come, or is it a 24-hour type facility?
The facility is open 24/7. They can come and go. We have a security gate where they punch in their little key code and they come and go as they like. We don't maintain regular office hours in our office anymore. It's just there's not too much to do there. 40 hours a week. It's pretty quiet. So we don't do that anymore. And that's one of the reasons we're thinking of doing this kiosk, is because then we'll have a presence there that can do. It'll even spit a lock out for you. If you need a lock for your unit, it'll sell you a lock on location. So it'll pretty much do everything that a part-time worker could do for you.
Okay. Well, and what are some of the problems you might have with a 24-hour, 24/7 facility? I mean, do people come in and just hang out and party?
Well, there's
a little party.
There's stories of people. Well, there's no electricity in the units, so the chances of partying are maybe a little smaller. But there are stories of garage bands bringing in generators and practicing in self-storage facilities, and so there's a lot of ordinances that don't allow that, because we're going to expand our facility, and I had to go through a zoning variance procedure recently. And one of the ordinances is that you will not have live entertainment or musical practices in your storage facility. So apparently it's been a problem somewhere else.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because I have a relative in California, and that's exactly what he does.
Oh, really?
That's their business. Is they have what are essentially large storage units, and they've retrofitted them for bands to come in and rehearse and practice. Okay. And now with technology being what it is, they can actually record an album right in these soundproof storage facilities. So I mean, it's zoned for that, and
sure.
it's all on the up and up. But that's Rage Against the Machine has rehearsed there. And in Los Angeles, of course, everybody wants to be a musician, so They need practice space. And he's turned storage facilities into that type of practice space.
Well, that's great. And I wondered where it all came from, why they would even have that lingo in the ordinances, but now we know.
Yeah, it's because of my my uncle in California. Yeah,
That's great.
Okay, so do you have security cameras then, making sure that
We
people
do. We
aren't?
have security cameras on location that you can monitor remotely. You have all the typical fencing, all that kind of stuff that you typically need to have. Snow plowing is a big thing. One of the big expenses for northern climates is getting rid of the snow. And then you have lawn maintenance. You got all kinds of little things that you have to do that are on a little bit bigger scale than maybe not on a multi-family type thing, probably similar type things. You got to have a snow plow and lawn maintenance guys running around all the time. And that can be a pretty big number relative to the overall expenses.
Yeah, especially if you're salting as well. I mean, snow plowing and salting can cost quite a bit.
Right.
What about ancillary income? I mean, I've rented from storage facilities before where they have, the UPS store with the materials for packing and boxing and shipping. Do you have any of that on site?
We don't have it on site because we're really not big enough to have it. We don't have any extra room for trucks or that type of thing like U-Haul or Penske trucks. We're built out pretty much to the perimeter of our lot, and which is why we're expanding. We bought the property next to us, which is another 2.5 acres, and we're looking to move on to that.
So you're going to build additional storage facility
right
on that acreage there.
And we might put a little bit bigger office in that we could have some of the, because you really need to have another one of the metrics that we talk about in the self-storage world is you really need to have roughly 400 to 500 units to justify having a full-time employee. And so we're half that size now, so we need to almost double in size to justify having somebody there full-time. And that's when you can introduce the boxes and all the other type things.
Okay. So with that in mind, you bought the space next door. There's a couple acres there. Would that allow you to double your size?
Yep.
And by the metrics you mentioned, the 7 square foot per person of available storage space, are you still within that range?
Yes, we did
makes sense?
We paid to have a third-party feasibility study done last fall, just to cover that metric to make sure we are within the guidelines. But anybody can do that 7 square foot thing. All you got to do is use Google Earth and look around. If you're thinking of doing a facility or buying a facility, you can determine the size of your competitors just by, because all the buildings are pretty much in 10-foot dimensions. They're either 40 feet by 60 feet or 40 feet by 100 feet. So once you get one building lined out, you can count the garage doors and determine the size of it. Mm-hmm. You can come up pretty close to the size of the facility. So maybe it's 50,000 square feet. And you got 4 of those facilities within 5 miles of you. So there's, 200,000 square feet. And then you go to the population and see how many people live in that area. So all that information is publicly available, and you can kind of do a back of the envelope type calculation in just a few minutes on your own to kind of get a feel for it. In most markets, we're still underbuilt, especially in more rural areas of the country. So
there's still more need for additional storage space.
Yeah.
Talk about the feasibility study, because when I was looking into self-storage, the advice I was finding online was do a feasibility study first. What is a feasibility study, and how much do they tend to cost?
Well, there's basically 2 types that you can buy. One is an online type study, and it's done by self-storage. There's lots of different places to go to have it done, but I used a guy out of Alabama named Bob Copper, and I've heard him speak before, and he's a pretty sharp guy. He's been involved in self-storage for 30-some years, so I respect his opinion. And he does he offers 2 levels of service. One is an online one where they do all the demographics online for you, calculate all the metrics that they deem important, determine whether there's a need for more storage units or square footage. And then they tell you what type and what size units would be most marketable. And then they have another full-blown study where they actually come out and do some site visits. They'll send somebody out and they'll do a survey of the market as well as survey locations. And they can get as specific as choosing a location for you and helping you negotiate the purchase and that type of thing. But you're probably looking at $1,500 to a couple $1,000s for the quick and dirty online type one, up to, I don't know, $10,000 for a full blown one.
Yeah, I'd imagine if they're doing a site visit and helping you negotiate at a certain site, then that can get quite pricey. But yet a valuable service too, because the last thing you want to do is purchase or build a self-storage facility that isn't needed.
Right. Make a $1 million mistake. So it's cheap insurance, I think, to go down that road.
So your expansion plans, you're going to double the size of your facility.
We think the township we're working in allows up to 40% of your land area to be covered with buildings. So that's one of our restraints. So we have roughly 2.5 acres to work with. So that's every acre is about 45,000 square feet. So
can you get any sort of zoning variance to do what you need?
We might be able to do that, but I think given the way we have to deal with water and retention ponds and that type of stuff, we're going to be hard pressed to get much above 40%, because a lot of the land's going to be given over to dealing with water and having space for plowing and roads and all that kind of stuff. So we'd be happy if we get 40%.
Will that give you coverage. What you need to
yeah, that
double?
Would give us over 40,000 more square feet, which is bigger than what we have now. So if we could simply double to get up to in the 60,000 square feet range, I think we'd be happy with that.
And then that means you're going to build an additional facility.
Yeah.
How did you just find a contractor that's familiar with building self-storage? I mean, how do you go about doing that? Because it's not like you're going to take a hammer and
no, it's no more
and
stick
some sheet
building.
metal and put together your own facility.
You can stick build. I mean, people still do pole barns and things like that.
True.
And that's probably, we won't go that route. We'll choose a self-storage specialist, and there's many of them across the country. One nearby us is an outfit called Tracty out of Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, and they make complete steel buildings, and they'll custom design it to whatever you want. The price of steel is down right now, and the price of the units or square footage wise, it's pretty reasonable. Less than $10 a square foot, you can buy a steel building. So then you have concrete and roads and utilities and all the other stuff. So it's an expensive proposition to get.
So as you go down this road, is there financing available for that kind of project?
There's some conventional financing. You do a construction type loan, and we have a pretty good relationship with our banker right now that we're dealing with. And we probably would do as a construction loan initially to get the project started, and then roll that into a complete financing package on the whole property when we're done.
So refinance the whole thing is one whole property
At the end, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then that allows you, doubling the size will allow you to do the what'd you call it, the kiosk that had
right. Insomniac.
So you can put some insomniacs in there.
Yeah, they're really the only guys in the. So I'm not plugging that particular company, but I think they might be the only guys in the business right now. So, and they make a whole arsenal of those Insomniac machines. They got little ones that you mount in the wall, and then they got standalone ones that are in like a big phone booth outside your facility. They have a whole different array of them. Some more sophisticated than others. So,
and the customer, going back to the Insomniac, the customer can use that and interface with an actual person on the other side if they need to.
Yeah, they have a call center that backs it up. So, if there's an issue with the customer having difficulty navigating the the process to get a unit. They'll pick up the phone. There's a phone there with a two-way video that they can actually see who they're talking to, and put the deal together for them.
And that's a 24/7 operation then.
24/7, yeah.
How incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty sophisticated. All the back office stuff that they do in self-storage now is it's not just build it and wait. Like what's the movie, if you build it, they will come. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not quite like that anymore. You have to actually go out and try and get customers and, have a website, a web presence now and all that. So
Yeah. So talk about that. How do you market and get customers? I mean, what's the number one marketing technique to bring people in?
Our web page now is our number one marketing.
So if someone does a Google search for storage facilities in a certain location, you would pop up.
We'd pop up, right. And that's all handled by the same folks that handle our management software. They have a suite where they build you a website. They have the management software for your facility, as well as all the back office stuff. And that's just a monthly maintenance fee for them to maintain that. The other thing is that we have a lot of, we're in a pretty good location on a fairly busy road, so we get a lot of drive-by traffic of folks that live nearby, so they just know it's there. And a lot of our customers come from there too. So I'm probably not the best at tracking that. I should have a better delineation of where our customers come from.
But you're visible from a road with good traffic count,
Right.
and so a lot of your clients come there because your visibility and they see you, so they're familiar with you.
Right, and that's getting tougher and tougher to do today because the towns and municipalities don't want self-storage front and center. They want you to be in an industrial zone off in the woods somewhere. Sometimes it's a tough thing to get approval for a new storage facility. For whatever reason, they think they're just tin shacks with a bunch of weeds growing up around them. And but most modern storage facilities today are pretty nice looking. In order to attract customers, they have to look presentable and look safe. And so there's a little bit of a balancing act between customers want the storage facility to be local, be nearby, convenient to them, and the towns and the government, the municipalities want them to be hidden away somewhere where no one can see them. So it's kind of a little bit of a balancing act going on there right now.
Sure, yeah. I can understand that because you're right. I think self-storage facilities that I've seen locally are very inviting. I mean, they look like a nice, attractive commercial type business, but we certainly all know the storage facilities that do look like shacks are kind of run down. Now, is yours climate controlled?
We don't have any climate controlled, and that's one of the things that the feasibility study pointed out is that they recommend that all of our new space be climate controlled.
So then would you go back and retrofit your existing space as well?
Probably not, because it's very expensive to do that, and it probably wouldn't make sense.
So you'd have two price points then.
Yeah.
You'd have your old space where it's not climate controlled, but you can probably rent out storage for a little less.
Yeah, it gets quite a premium, probably 20 to 25% premium.
Climate controlled, and climate control means that it's kept at a constant temperature. So if you're storing things that you're concerned about getting too hot or too cold, the climate control takes care of that.
Keeps the humidity within a certain range and temperature within a certain range, both warm and cold. Yeah.
Now, well, that'll be a nice option to give your customers.
It's not a big thing in the north until recently. It's huge in the south because of the high humidity in Florida and that type of thing. Most of the facilities down there are climate controlled. Where up here it's kind of transitioning. We're getting more and more calls for people looking for it. So we're going to do that. I'm not sure if we're going to do all the space climate control, but we're certainly going to add some as part of our plan.
And the feasibility study indicated that climate control would be welcome?
He recommended it all be built that way because there's a decided lack of it in our area. So I think there's only one other facility nearby that even offers it. So, they captured that part of the market. So that's why they determined that it would make sense to do it.
Okay. So this is a big project you have coming up, the building out your existing facility. Are you still looking for other spaces?
Kind of. We're not actively looking, but because the market is hot right now, we get calls constantly if we're interested in listing our current facility. And so we are always looking for an opportunity. So I'll say never, but if the right deal came along that would take us out of our facility and move us into another one, I'd be, because I don't want to drive 100 miles back and forth to Burton every week. So
How often do you do that?
right now I'm going about once a week.
Okay.
And I have some outside maintenance guys that are there other days of the week. But for the first few months, I was going there a couple times a week. I'd stay overnight and spend a lot of time there because there's a lot of physical things that needed to be done. And we're changing operations and doing a lot of improvements, that type of stuff. So we still got a ways to go on that, but we're much further down the line. So it's kind of up and running. We've got our occupancy up quite a bit. We have our rents up quite a bit, so cash flow's improved dramatically from when we took it over. So we're pretty happy with our progress so far.
Well, that's great. I mean, I know when you bought it, you were shooting for that 15% cash on cash return. But the nice thing about owning property is you don't just own it for one specific sliver of time. You know, you own it for years or however. So every year, if you're operating it correctly, that cash on cash return should be getting better and better each year.
Yeah.
And is that what you're experiencing?
It is. We anticipated our initial payback would be about 5 years to get our cash back out of it, and we're going to do better than that. So significantly better than that. So we'll be able to, I guess the real point of that is that because we're increasing the cash flow, we're increasing the value of the property. And that's really where the money is made, is when you go and sell the property. So as we go down this road of adding land, adding additional units and so on, at any point in that process, we have something that's worth more than what we started with. So we're real comfortable with where we're at right now based on our cash flow, and the dynamics of the business have been good for us so far.
Well, that's great. And what advice would you have for investors out there who are interested in getting into self-storage?
Do some homework. It's like anything, you need to get up to speed on what's happening. I wouldn't go the development route from the start. Go buy a piece of land and start there. It's a tough thing to do because you have huge carrying costs for the first few years to get the facility up and running. Find an existing facility that's needs some work, if you ever fixed up a rental property, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Something's wrong with it, and you got to fix it or make sure it can be fixed. Don't buy something that can't be fixed, but most properties can be corrected in one way or another. So.
And what resources are out there for the person looking to get into self-storage?
Well, you could go through the route I went through and touch base with this guy, Scott Myers, down in Indianapolis. His little operation, they do a lot of business. He's not just a teacher, he's an investor. And they have investor clubs of people that don't want to actively participate. They just want to bring money to the game and be a part owner. They have all kinds of opportunities for that, as well as actively seeking out and buying your own property. The other thing I would do is just go to InsideSelfStorage.com, and that is a nationwide organization that has a magazine they publish monthly that you can get for free. Just sign up, and that magazine will give you an insight into what's going on in the corporate self-storage world, but it'll give you a kind of a leg up on terminology and things to look for and sales that are going on nearby. Like there's properties changing hands in Grand Rapids all the time. There was just a sale on a property down on 36th Street, of like 400 units.
Wow.
Sold. It's in an industrial zone. You would never even know it's there.
Mm-hmm. Just
sold for, well, I'm not going to say, but it's sold.
It's sold for a good price, I'm sure.
Right.
Are you pretty happy with the fact that you You sold off your rental property portfolio and moved it into self-storage?
Yeah, I'm very happy because as I get a little bit older, managing the single-family homes is getting a little tougher. Excuse me. And so this is, I'm not saying I'm ready to retire or anything, but this self-storage business dovetails more with my plans going forward for the next 10 years or so. Because if you get the facility up and running right, and it's big enough, I'm not quite big enough yet. I don't have enough units to justify having a full-time employee, but you get to the point where it can be managed with an employee that knows what's going on. And there's quite a few folks out there that like this type of work, that you don't have to visit it every week, and you can even be more of a hands-off type manager, and you have property managers helping you out. And there's also a lot of companies that will manage the property professionally for you. So there's a big company out of Detroit that does a lot of property management, and they've contacted me about managing this property, but I'm not quite big enough to justify the expense with them yet. So,
and even though you're going there one day a week to actually be on site, how much work are you doing during the rest of the week toward the facility?
Well, I handle most of the phone calls during the day from the facility, or for people looking for space. And so I'm on the phone, it's maybe 2 or 3 calls a day, people seeking information about renting. We're pretty full. We're up to about 86, 87% occupancy right now, so we don't have a lot of units left to rent. So it's pretty quiet during the week.
Where did you start with the occupancy when you bought it?
Probably around 70%.
Okay, so you brought it up from 70 to about 86%. What's a typical occupancy factor for self-storage?
They used to say that if you were in the mid to low 80s, you were considered full, 80%. So if you had 100 units and you had 82, 85 of them rented, you're pretty much full. But the big boys, the REITs, have bumped that up to 92 or 93%. They can keep their facilities that full. So that's kind of where we're shooting. We want to be in that high 80s, low 90s. We got a ways to go yet, but we're getting closer. And plus we raised prices on all the units. So not only do we have more customers, but they're all paying a higher price than they did a year ago. So,
all right, so that has a dramatic effect on your net operating income.
Yeah, we had that all planned out. That was part of our plan. But we were able to do it a little bit quicker than we thought initially. So it's worked out pretty well.
Great. Well, Mike, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us today about self-storage. I mean, I know it's a fascinating topic for me, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners are just as interested. Thank you very much. Good luck with your expansion plans.
Well, thanks, Brian. It's been a pleasure chatting with you this morning, and I hope we covered the info in enough detail so folks get a real feel for what self-storage is all about.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.